I don't know my glasses. Should I bring my glasses so I can read it? Chapter 6, text 47. Yoginam abhisarvesham Bhagatin antaradmana Shradhavam bhajate yoma Sameyuktatamomata. Together we're supposed to chant these. Not together we chant the English. And of all yogis,
he who always abides with me with great faith, worshiping whom intents in a loving service, is most intimately united with me and will recognize me as all.
Chapter 7, text 1, together, Sanskrit. Shri Bhagavan Vacha. Translation. Now hear, O son of Pritha, Arjuna, together. Text 2. Jnanam teham savijnanam. Translation. I shall now text 3. Anushanam. Translation. Out of many text 4. Bhumirapo nalo. Translation. Earth, water, fire. Text 5. Apareyam. Translation. Besides this inferior nature, text 6. Eta Joni. Translation. Of all that is material, text 7. Atak Paratanam Nami. Translation. O conqueror of wealth, Arjuna. Say, Rasoham Apsu. Translation, O son of Kunti, Arjuna. Next 9. Punyogandha Prativyam Cha. Translation, I am the original frame. And finally, text 10. Bijam Mams. Okay. Go back to text 47, chapter 6. Someone has a microphone, they can read. Read the translation to 47, please.
And of all yogis, he who always abides in me with great faith, worshiping me in transcendental loving service, is most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all.
Purport.
Purport. The word bhajate is significant here. Bhajate has its root in the verb bhaj, which is used when there is need of service. The English word worship cannot be used in the same sense as bhaja. Worship means to adore, or to show respect and honor the worthy one, to the worthy one. But service with love and faith is especially meant for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One can avoid worshiping a respectable man or a demigod and may be called discourteous, but one cannot avoid serving the Supreme Lord without being thoroughly condemned.
Now, the question often comes up, why can't one have a relationship in bhakti or love with a demigod or with another person? And the answer is that, first of all, no one is worthy of having unadulterated service except Krishna. There's no one like Krishna. There's no one else. There's no one, he's a asamordva. No one is equal to him, no one is greater than him. Anyone who compares someone to Krishna he's called a Pashandi, infidel, or he's an atheist. How can there be anyone equal to God? God means the Supreme Being, singular, not plural. Nityo Nityanam, Chaitanas Chaitananam. There are a plural number of living entities, and they have similar qualities to the Lord. Qualities. They're eternal, they're conscious, but he is the one who supplies the necessities of all the others. How can anyone be equal to him? Even if one tries to compare Lord Shiva with Krishna, it doesn't work. He's simply not able to fulfill all the requirements for being the Supreme Person. And only the Supreme Person is to be worshipped. Not just worshipped, but served without an expectation of anything in return. Well, why without expectation of anything in return? Because he's already supplying everything. Since time immemorial, he's supplying everything for every living entity. So there's no question of trying to put some business agreement. And he's the only one who's supplying. If a demigod is given credit for supplying, what does it mean? It means the person doesn't know where the demigod's getting his supplies from. It's like we say, well, where does food come from? A child will say, the food comes from my mother. She takes it out of the refrigerator, she gives it to me. That's not a very complete understanding. You ask the mother, she said, no, it doesn't come from me, it comes from the supermarket. You go to the supermarket and say, no, food doesn't come from us, it comes from the truck. Or the trucker said, where's the food? It doesn't come from the truck, it comes from the farm. Go to the farmer and say, food comes from you? No, it comes from the land. Ask the landlord. That doesn't come from me. It comes from the seeds and from the rain. So you go to get the seeds. Where do these seeds come from? Where does the water come from? Well, Indra you could say he supplies the water. He supplies the water, but where does the water come from? It comes from clouds. Where do the clouds come from? So then Krishna is brought into the picture. His bijo mamaham bhutana. He's the seed giver for all living entities. Aham bija pradapita. He gives the seeds and he provides bhumir. We're reading that text, look, 7:4. Someone can read that?
Earth. Hare Krishna. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. Altogether, these 8 comprise my separated material energies.
So that's where the buck stops, so to speak. In other words, now you found the origin, because he's the source of all the living entities. Next verse. Takes 5. Someone can read it? We're on page. Nana, you can read. Okay, which page are you on? What is it?
369. Besides this inferior nature, O mighty armed Arjuna, there is a superior energy of mind which are all living entities who are struggling with material nature and are sustaining the universe.
Krishna takes responsibility for supplying all the seeds, all the earth, water, the fire, air, the ether, mind, the intelligence, false ego. And now he's taking credit for supplying the living entities within the seeds. There's simply no one but him who can claim all this. It all comes back to him. Lord Shiva comes from him, Brahma comes from Shiva. No, excuse me. Shiva comes from Brahma, Brahma comes from Garbhodaksha Vishnu, Garbhodaksha Vishnu comes from Mahavishnu, Mahavishnu comes from Sankarshan, Narayan, originally Balaram, before Balaram, Krishna. Ete Changsa Kala Pungsam, Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam. Indraya Vyakalam Lokam, Hridyanti Yuge Yuge. Of all the incarnations that are described in the Bhagavatam, Krishna is the source of all. There's no possibility of anyone competing with him in that position. He's the only one that deserves unalloyed, complete, selfless service. Nobody else can claim that role. They can't perform like him. It's like, a crude example, if you want to give service to the tree, you have to give it through the root. If you don't give it through the root, if you give it through any other part, it cannot accept it. It'll die. Have to give it through the root. Krishna is the root. He is the source of everything. Therefore, there's no replacing him. And he's the most lovable. There's no one who's worthy of being worshipped like him. Others can be respected. That's very nice, because they're parts and parcel of Krishna. They have some good qualities. But nobody should be put in the place of Vishnu or Krishna. That's the main reason why you can't have bhakti for anyone else, because they're not worthy. You say, well, I overlooked their faults, their shortcomings. But that's a fault on your part too. You're overlooking. Like, once a lady, Prabhupada tells this little anecdote. I'll try to remember it. But some highly placed official in the government had done something, and she was very pleased, and so she blessed me. She said, "May you get the job as chief of police of Blue Hills." Something like that. She thought she was really giving him a blessing, but he's high above chief of police of Blue Hills. So her benediction was actually an insult. She didn't understand his position. He was already far above. So similarly, there's no comparison to Krishna. He sums it up beautifully. What's the verse? That everything is resting on him as pearls are strung in a thread. How's that verse begin? Atak paratanam nanyat kinchid asti jananjat Mai sarvam idam protam sutre maniganaya. What a beautiful description. I'm the source of everything. Everything emanates from me. Everything is There's no truth superior to me. What's the translation?
O conqueror of wealth, Arjuna, there is no truth superior to me. Everything rests upon me as pearls are strung on a thread.
That summarizes the whole thing. Everything rests upon me. That means demigods, the living entities, material energy, the planets, the atoms, you name it, it all rests on Krishna as pearls are strung in a thread. Pearls don't just go in the sky. They have to be resting on something. Without that something resting, pearls are not very valuable. So nothing without the thread of Krishna has any value. These are the four seed verses of the Bhagavatam. The fourth one is, if there is anything that appears to be of reality or value without Krishna, know that to be the illusory energy of the Lord. If someone has Bhagavatam, they can look up that verse. 4 seed verses. So, the seed verses of Bhagavatam, because it establishes Krishna as the unique position of being the supreme lovable object, and he's also the only one that can love in return fully. How can someone give love in return if he has to give up, change his body after a certain period of time? He says, I love you, but at a certain point, my body's going to be finished. It's like a Titanic, they said. They were both, one of them was going to die. But I believe our love will go on forever. A nice belief, but his body is what we're loving. Now he's left his body in the ocean, eaten by the sharks, other fish. So now what happened to the relationship? Who are you relating to? Well, he was a nice-looking man. Now so what kind of love is that? Even the demigods, even if you worship the demigods, it's temporary. They have to give up their bodies also. In every way, only Krishna is able to completely reciprocate with every living entity. Lord Shiva is the most powerful demigod. He's called Mahadev. And he certainly carries a wonderful responsibility to look after those living entities that are in the mode of ignorance. He tries to help them as far as he can. But even his benedictions, they only work up to a point. If Lord Shiva gives a benediction that, shall we say, what is it, in electricity, if you cross a wire or something like that, cross circuit, if it interacts with some other short circuits or appears to short circuit some benediction that Krishna is given, then your benediction doesn't work. As soon as Lord Shiva gives a benediction that Krishna doesn't approve of it, it doesn't happen. It only happens if Krishna approves it. So ultimately, he's the supreme decider. He has to confirm everything Everything has to be run by him. He may delegate his power to other living entities and that's fine. He can do that. That doesn't minimize his position. But, for example, the goddess of fortune, when the goddess of fortune appeared from the ocean of milk, the churning of the ocean of milk, she went, all the demigods were there, everyone else said, choose me. She had a garland. She was going to choose who was going to be her husband. This was the who's who of the universe. They were all everything. But she said no to all of them until Vishnu came. She chose Vishnu as her husband. So there's no comparison. He's the only one that can accept the love eternally, the only one you can give love to eternally, the only one who's existed eternally. In the sense that all living entities live eternally, but they are not the source, the cause. He's the Sarvakarana Karana, cause of all causes. So if Mother Lakshmi would not accept anyone except Vishnu, she's the most sought after female in the universe because she's goddess of fortune, most beautiful, supplying all opulences. She chose Vishnu. She's the highest female. Any other discussion? We can go on to the next text. We did 4 and 5. We can do text 1 now of chapter 7. Someone can read that.
Now hear, O son of Pritha Arjuna, how by practicing yoga and full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. In this 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the nature of Krishna consciousness, yes, is fully described. Krishna is full in all opulences, and how he manifests such opulences is described herein. Also, 4 kinds of fortunate people who become attached to Krishna, 4 kinds of unfortunate people who never take to Krishna, are described in this chapter. In the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, the living entity has been described as non-material, spirit soul, which is capable of elevating himself to self-realization by different types of yogas. At the end of the 6th chapter, it has been clearly stated that the steady concentration of the mind upon Krishna, or in other words, Krishna consciousness, is the highest form of all yoga. By concentrating one's mind upon Krishna, one is able to know the absolute truth completely, but not otherwise. Impersonal Brahmajyoti, a localized Paramatma realization, is not perfect knowledge of the absolute truth because it is partial. Full and scientific knowledge is Krishna, and everything is revealed to the person in Krishna consciousness. In complete Krishna consciousness, one knows that Krishna is the ultimate knowledge beyond any doubts. Different types of yoga are only stepping stones on the path of Krishna consciousness. One who takes directly to Krishna consciousness automatically knows about Brahmajyoti and Paramatma in full. By practice of Krishna consciousness, one can know everything in full, namely the absolute truth, the living entities, the material nature, and their manifestations with paraphernalia. One should therefore begin yoga practice as directed in the last verse of the 6th chapter. Concentration of the mind upon Krishna, the Supreme, is made possible by prescribed devotional service in 9 different forms, of which Shravanam is the first and most important. Is someone going to be with Maharaj while he's upstairs? And the Lord therefore says to Arjuna, Tat Shrinu, or hear from me. No one can be a greater authority than Krishna, and therefore by hearing from him one receives the greatest opportunity for progress in Krishna consciousness. One has therefore to learn from Krishna directly, or from a pure devotee of Krishna, and not from a non-devotee upstart puffed up with academic education. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, this process of understanding Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Absolute Truth, is described in the 2nd chapter of the 1st canto as follows. Shrimantam svakatam Krishna punya shravana kirtanah hridyantasto hi bhadrani vidunoti suhritsatam nashta prayesh abhadrishu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki tada rajastamo bhava kama lobhadayaschaye cheta etanabhidham stittam sattve prasidati evam prasana manaso bhagavad bhakti-yogatah Bhagavad tattva vijnanam mukta sangasya jayate vidyate hridaya grantis chidyante sarvasamshayah shiyante chasya karmani drishta evatmanishvare. To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita is itself righteous activity. And for one who hears about Krishna, Lord Krishna, who is dwelling in everyone's heart, acts as the best wishing friend and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him. In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge. As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam and from the devotees, he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord. By development of devotional service, one becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance, and thus material lusts and avarice are diminished. When these impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, and understands the science of God perfectly. Thus, bhakti-yoga severs the hard knot of material affection and enables one to become at once to the stage of asamshayam samagram, understanding of the Supreme Absolute Truth Personality of Godhead. Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness can one understand the science of Krishna. So this verse is very important. Shall I move over? No, so this verse, Krishna is telling Arjuna to hear from him, actually. Because this is how one can actually understand, as Prabhupada writes, by hearing from Krishna, one can understand the science of Krishna. Because this is revelation, knowledge, or the science of God cannot be understood by one's own power. Because God is unlimited and he's beyond matter. And our senses only have the power, which is given by him, to understand matter. And that to a limited degree, where we have imperfect senses, subject to illusion, we make mistakes, we therefore cheat others or cheat ourselves, and we have imperfect senses. So therefore, it's very difficult to assess the truth by these 4 defects that essentially the conditioned soul has. But when approaching the absolute truth, like Arjuna does, he says here, he's being instructed by Krishna, with your mind attached to me. This is the key. This verse is talking about asakta manah partha. This is technically at the level of asakti. And then real hearing begins. Because at this level, one will hear with full faith, not, just theoretically, but with an interest to apply this fully in his life. So this is a different kind of hearing, and one must come to this level of hearing actually, if one wants to be freed from all doubts, because we shouldn't hear like mundane, puffed up academic educators who simply want to hear or study religion as something theoretical or something that may or may not be true. But devotee hears, he already has faith that whatever Krishna is saying is actually true. But he's hearing to try to understand and to clear up his misconceptions, not with doubt, not coming with a challenging attitude. So that's the difference between all other processes of yoga, is that to some degree one is still attached to his own power of understanding and his own abilities to assess what is reality and what is the supreme absolute truth.
I'll do what I say.
And what they can actually perceive. Although they're studying the same object, those who are trying to understand the absolute truth by their own mental powers, like the Gyan yogis, they're studying the same absolute truth, or those who practice yoga and meditation, but because they're still attached to their own, abilities to understand the absolute truth, they're limited in what they can perceive.
One thing is,
Yes, Maharaj?
I'm still here. Different seat, but still tuned in. So, say, like you said, the devotee already has full faith that Krishna is the Supreme Lord, and everything he says is accepted. He gets that faith because, among other things, he sees, well, if a person like my spiritual master, so intelligent, so qualified, he accepts Krishna, and that's good enough for me. I've never met anyone like my spiritual master. So if he accepts, he's already thought it all out. I can accept whatever he says. Similarly, if you go to his spiritual master, he'll say, yes, like go to Prabhupada. Say, Prabhupada, why did you accept? Of course, he has faith in Shastra also. He also pointed out that his guru, Bhakti, Saraswati Thakur, so qualified, walking, living encyclopedia. So in this way, thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Maharaj, I heard that we see the quality of our spiritual master and we say, he accepts Krishna. I never met anybody like my spiritual master. Therefore, let me actually also accept Krishna, that he actually is the supreme. And then we say, okay, well, Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada also accepts, Krishna. What kind of a person is Srila Prabhupada? And then Srila Bhaktisiddhanta also accepts Krishna as the supreme person. And then he was like the walking encyclopedia, so.
Jai. Yeah, that's an important point, because for us who are not so fortunate, to be directly in front of Krishna, Krishna sends his representatives. So, and we're convinced by their qualities that there must be God, because how can such great personalities as them walk this earth, who are fully engaged and devoted to God and all their actions are beneficial for every living entity, actually. They're not interested in exploiting others and simply in name, fame, adoration, distinction, or to come up very much materially. They're just interested in devoting their life to God and serving Him and helping others come along in that path. And even if they have some faults materially or externally, because they still have a material body, so the body is, subject to defects, and, as long as one has his body, he still has to, deal with the body. But we see that their whole life is devoted fully to Krishna. There's a verse that says, Jivan Mukta. He may still have a material body, but because his body is used fully to whatever degree he can in Krishna's service, he is considered liberated. He is no longer affected by the laws of karma or bound by the laws of the material world, although he's carrying a material body. And the material body may be subject to, death and disease and so many things. And one can even make mistakes with this material body. But the spiritual master is fully liberated, pure, because his whole life is dedicated, body, mind, and words, to Krishna. And that's the aspect that's attractive. And that's what Krishna ultimately wants to give the living entity, is pure devotion unto him. This is the greatest gift. So by understanding Krishna in full and free from doubt, then ultimately this will help one in perfecting one's life and coming to Krishna conscious. So one nice example, I'll just end here because with this example, that's given into regards to those who follow different paths to understand the absolute truth. So the paths are likened to like senses. So we see the same object. For example, the example given in the Srimad Bhagavatam is milk. So milk can be heard and we know it's milk. It can be seen and we see it's white. It can be tasted and we see it's sweet. So based on our different senses, we get different knowledge on that same object. So based on different paths that one takes, one perceives different aspects of the absolute truth. So because the bhakti-yoga process allows one to fully appreciate the absolute truth in full, we accept the bhakti-yoga process. Or other processes may be able to perceive different aspects of the absolute truth. But bhakti-yoga helps us meet Krishna, the person in full of all his qualities. So it's a nice example. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Sindhivaya vacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namah.